Okay, so on our last session, we saw the basics of the React and we implemented two pages. One was profile page and second was a URL shortener page where we give a long URL and in response we get a short URL, right? So in this session, we'll focus on backend. Okay, so first we'll follow the same steps. First, we'll see the basics of the Node.js. And once we are clear with all the features and basic things we'll be using in Node.js, then we'll implement it. The actual APIs which we'll have to write so that our front end works with our own backend, that we'll be writing ultimately. So we'll divide this session into two parts. First part, we'll be learning about Node.js, how syntax, how to write, what's the features, and next we'll be implementing. Okay, so this session has one more thing, which is authentication. So we'll start with on. Okay. So as I showed you yesterday, our project was running. We were able to log in, we were able to log out, right? So authentication was working perfectly. It is implemented from before, right? So let me once again run that project and show you quickly. Let's say if I have to run the whole project, what was the command? Npm run dev, the very first command which we ran. So it's running in 3000. And here I'll say login. So look at the flow. When I click on login, it gives me a screen where I choose a Google account, right? Once I choose this Google account, it it should send me some message. Let me check. Okay, I'll come back to this point, but it's pending because our server is right now not running. Anyway, so I'll give you the high level overview of how authentication works, and then we'll move to Node.js. Okay, so let's say when we try to log in, we first thing we do is log in with Google. Am I right? Once we click on this, yeah. So when we have to log in with Google, we click on login with Google. Then we select one of our Google account, right? Google account. Once we select a Google account, you see a consent screen, like allow this site to share your data. Am I right? So next is the consent screen. And if you agree to it and say continue, then what happens here is in backend, what you are doing is you are sharing Google client ID, and in return, Google will give you Google JWT token. Okay. So we should also discuss what is this Google client ID and all. So let's visualize this with a block label diagram. What I'll do is what are in picture, I'll draw a block for them. Let's say we have client. Client is basically, you can say, the end users. This is also sometimes called as front end, right? Then we have a backend, which you can say as a server. Backend or a server, right? There is one more thing which is in picture, which is Google. Google. Now, before we do these things, actually, we are using a feature of Google called as OAuth 2, right? So what we do is we go to Google and sign in their developer console and get a auth2 credentials. This credential has two things. One is Google client ID and second is Google secret key. There are two things, Google client ID, Google secret key. So if Google is giving me this, Google will already have this with it, right? So can I say Google has Google client ID as well as Google secret key, right? But as we are generating it, Google gives that to us also. So we'll keep that Google client ID and Google secret in our backend. Okay. So now our backend has these two things. Google has these two things. Addition to this, we'll keep one more secret key with us, that is JWT secret. JWT secret key. This we will generate and only keep with us. Okay. Now this Google client ID is a public ID. This will share with our client. Now see, let's see step by step all of this process. So what will happen is these keys are with everyone. First step is clients click on login with Google and sends the client ID to Google. So client sends a Google client ID to Google. Now, if we send a client ID to Google, can Google identify who generated this? Yes, because it is already there with the Google. So Google knows this client ID is generated for which application. So Google will ask this user, sign in the consent for this application. We will be sharing your data with this application. So if user says okay, Google in return will give Google JWT. We'll talk in detail about JWT. This is a token which cannot be tampered by a client. You cannot change anything. If you change anything in that, whoever generated it will be easily able to identify. So once again, what client is doing is client is trying to log into Google by sending a Google client ID. Google identify this client ID was generated by whom. It generates a Google JWT token and gives to client. Now client will send this JWT which it received to backend. Google JWT to backend. Okay, our server. What our server will do is our server will verify, did Google generate this JWT for our application? So our backend will send this Google JWT to Google and ask Google, is this a valid JWT which you generated? If Google says yes, then this is a valid JWT token. Why we are verifying is because if we do not verify, anyone can generate any JWT, right? And just send it to us in the backend. So we shouldn't allow that user to log in. Once Google verify that Google generated this JWT token, means we know one thing, this guy has a Google account in Google for sure. So there are two things now. If Google says this token I generated, means user has a valid account in Google. What we are going to do here is Google flow is done now. We will create one JWT, and to create JWT, we require a secret key. This secret key is with us. So I'll use this JWT secret and create a JWT for this user. JWT has three things. You can divide JWT token into three parts. One is header section. Second one is payload. And there are some secrets. So in this payload section, you can put user information, because later on user will be sending this JWT with every API call it makes to the backend. So if you need to know like who is this guy who is sending, so you can just decode the JWT and get the user details. The JWT is divided into three parts, and this is one single token which backend will be sending to frontend. Once frontend gets this JWT, frontend is logged into our application, and every API call here onwards frontend will make, it will send this JWT, and our backend is going to verify it. Now you can say that the JWT this client is sending, client can change something in JWT? No. Why? Because our server generated it, and our server generated it with a secret key which is only there with our server. If we share the secret key to anyone, they will be easily able to generate JWT. But here, as we are not sharing it with anyone, no one can generate a JWT. So next time onwards, when API call is made by a user or a client, it will send a JWT. How we are going to verify is, there is a method in JWT. It takes two things. One is JWT token and secret key. And it will verify, was this JWT created by this secret key? If yes, then the user is allowed to do the operation, else forbidden, and you will get a error. Right? So let's try to visualize this one by one by writing the step. So can I say step 1? Here, client is going to send Google client ID to Google. Can you tell me in return what will Google give? Google JWT. Perfect. Next, client will share this Google JWT with server. Right? Server will verify it with Google that this JWT shared by user is correct or not. If it is correct, then server is going to give back its own JWT now, which is created using the secret key, which only our server has, right? Now, once client receives this JWT, here onwards, any request client makes, any API call or any request client makes, it needs to share this JWT. What will our server do is every time it will verify this JWT shared by the user is or was generated by our server only or not. If it was generated by our server, well and good, allowed to do the operation or give the data which user want, right? So this is authentication, how it is implemented in our project. So we'll go in detail when we write a code. I'll also show you how these things are being working in our project. Okay. Now, yesterday or in our previous session, we discussed high level design of high level block design of our project. So once again, let's go through this because now we are going to have discussion on backend. So let's refresh this. Okay. So we are building a MERN project where we have React, we have Express as a server, we have MongoDB as a database, and Node.js as a JavaScript runtime engine, right? So see this carefully. Here you will see that we have a front end, which is a React application, right? This front end will be used by client, correct? Right? Then we have a backend, which is basically running a JavaScript code using Node.js. And we have a MongoDB database. Now, how these all things is created is, I have one question. So there are two types of server. One is called as web server. Another one is called as API server. Do you know the difference between these two? What does web server does? Pages. Delivers pages. And what does API server does? Delivers data. Now, when we have a React application and when we build our React application, it gives us one folder that is called a dist. Am I right? So our web server will be using this dist to deliver the pages, and our API server will be using ultimately database to deliver data. Okay, there are a few more things into picture. Let me just tell you. So using Express, you can generate routes. Like every API has a different path, right? So those path has a specific functionality. So those path you can define using routes, and the functions of those path route you can declare in controller, right? But those controller cannot directly talk to MongoDB. They will talk to MongoDB using Mongoose library. So Mongoose has a model. Models are basically a schema of tables. So Mongoose is the library which will help you to connect with MongoDB, retrieve the data or send the data, right? So this web server, it's pretty much very clear that it will serve all the web pages from this. API server will go through route to controller. Controller will talk to Mongoose and Mongoose will talk to database to send the data. So API server will deliver data using these things, right? Now this web server and API server are nothing but in our project, it is Express server. Express server is doing both the things. It is delivering pages. It is also delivering data, right? So Once again, let me tell you quickly. Front end is our React application. Express is our server. Okay, Express has a router which can differentiate different APIs, and all the functionalities of the APIs are written in controller. This controller will talk with Mongoose. With the help of Mongoose, it will retrieve the data or send the data to MongoDB. So this is 3 tiers application where we have front end, back end, and a database. Got it? Okay. Now, if this diagram you understand well, you will be easily able to understand the Node.js application. It is going to be much, much simpler than the previous session discussion. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so first I'll be covering few things which are basics of Node.js. Then we'll be actually writing the code in Node.js. Okay, so right now just focus on what I am taking you through. Next, I'll give you time to implement these things by yourself in our project, right? So, okay, let me go through a completely new Node.js project. So these commands are written and available in articles in MentorPick. You can go through this later. So let's say if we have to create a new Node.js project, okay, simple thing which you will have to do is write npm init. Okay, so before that, let me do one thing. Let me just make a folder backend. Go to this backend, open this. Right now, there is nothing over here inside the backend, right? Now I write npm init. It asks for package name. Let it be backend. I'm not going to change it. It's asked for version, description of the project, entry point. You can change index.js to app.js or some other name if you want. Then test command, git repository, keywords, author, license. That's all. Now if I come over here, you see a package.json. I have also said you in previous session, any JavaScript project will have a package.json, and this is the important most file, right? Now, here it says that the starting point is index.js, right? But to structure our project well, what we will be doing is we'll be creating one more file, one more folder here. Let's call it as source. Inside source, we'll be keeping a file index.js. So one thing we'll have to change in our package.json, which is instead of writing index.js, our main file is now at source index.js, right? So correct. If I have to run this project, it is pretty much very, very easy. See, in index.js, I'll write something, let's say console.log node.js running. Okay. Can you tell me the command what I should run? Node index.js, but index.js is inside source. So I'll have to say source index.js, right? Node.js running. Perfect. So in package.json, we discussed about script yesterday. Instead of me writing every time node source index.js, I'll create a script here. Let's say dev. And here I'll be writing node source slash index.js. And now here onwards, I don't have to remember the command. If I just say npm run dev, you see node.js running, right? Now there is a package called as nodemon. Okay, so what happens is now if I change anything in my console.log, like let me say my name is Kaushik. If I save this, Is it getting printed over here? No, it just ran it and you see the command went off, right? So to keep looking at the changes, instead of using node, we'll be using nodemon. But let's go through this. So uh, Node.js is a runtime environment that lets you run JavaScript outside the browser, ideally for building fast, scalable backend service applications. So yesterday also I discussed about this. Browser like Chrome has a V8 engine which can run JavaScript. Same V8 engine is taken out and created Node.js. So Node.js is a runtime environment where you can run JavaScript code. Now in this Node.js, the important most library is Express. Express is the server which will help you to write APIs, use routes, and all those things, deliver pages and all. So Express is a library which is important. So to install Express, as I told you yesterday, if you just remember the name, just write npm express and you will get the command to install it, right? So I'll get the command from here. I'll just go back and here if I run this command, you should see this added in the dependency over here. You see in dependencies now Express is there, right? So Express is the server. Let's start setting this server. But we need few more packages. Let me install all of them at a time so that I do not waste time on installing them. So I need some more package which is Morgan. I also need Nodemon. So I can install all of them in one single command by just writing here sudo npm I morgan, this one morgan, and I want Nodemon, so I can give Nodemon. If you want something else, you can also write something else over here. Like if I need, let's say, course, so I can write course also over here. If you need one more, then you can write one more over there. Okay, so this is how I install these all things. Now to run my Express server, I'll need a port where I can run my server, right? Okay. So one more changes we will do. We'll update our package.json script and module type. Like if I go to package.json, here we'll keep this type as module. It will help you use ES6 features. Okay. So I have kept module. Okay, dev script we have already added, right? It was node source/app.js. We'll add one more script start. Okay. Now the thing over here is just understand I'm replacing node with nodemon, right? Nodemon source/index.js. Here also I'll write nodemon source index.js. Now in index.js, we will use Express. So I have given you a template over here. We can just use this template. So first thing we'll be doing is we need to import Express. Okay. I'll also import Morgan and Path for now. I'll tell you what are the uses for it. So the package you have installed, you can import by just writing import package name from that package. Okay. Now Express is a server. So we'll be creating an app with this server. Okay. We have discussed about const, let, var variable. So I'll not discuss again with it. But const is a constant variable where it is referencing to the same place every time, right? These are middlewares. Morgan and Express are the middlewares. I'm just adding it here for now, but later on, I'll explain you in detail about this. there is a dummy API. Let me add this dummy API also over here and start the servers. So I want to run it in 3000. So see here, what I am doing is I am saying app, which I built through Express, saying app.listen at this port 3000. So let me run this file. Can you tell me quickly the command to run it? Npm run dev. Perfect. Mm, I think I'm running it the wrong place. Just a second. Yeah, this is the correct place. So npm run dev. Yeah, it's running in 3000. So I can just copy this because it's running in 3000. Let's see what it gives to us. Says cannot get anything. But here if I go, I've written something API slash name. If I add this path over here, you see this data we are getting. So this is one API or an endpoint. We hit this endpoint, it gives us back the data, right? So our Express is up and running and we validated it that it is giving data. Several mini APIs you can write. Like here, I can write one more. Let's just write it as API. Okay, here I'll be writing my name. So I'm sending actually a JSON data from here. So now if I remove name from here, just hit API, it will give us my name. Else it will give the other name, right? Okay. Now here I added two more things. One was Morgan and one was express.json. These are the middlewares. Okay, it runs when you try to hit any endpoint. So it start running from here. It will run all the middlewares, and wherever your path matches, it will just start running the function over there, right? So let me show you this console. You see here get slash API printed. Yes. Now if I change this to, let's say, API slash name, you see get API slash name getting printed. These endpoint paths are getting printed because of Morgan. Okay, so it will make you easy to debug like what endpoints are getting hit. That is why we use Morgan over here. Now the next middleware is express.json. What this does, it parses the JSON data. So when we are hitting this endpoint, it is sending the data, right? Or if user sends the data, so that data will be passed to JSON. We already discussed about JSON in our last session. Okay. So let's quickly have a summarization of this. So if we'll have to create a Node.js project, we run a command which is npm init, right? It gives you a package.json which has the details of the project. Am I right? So mainly there are three parts: details about the project, scripts, and dependencies, right? Now here these because of help, if we look at these dependencies, there are versions here. Their details are in package log.json and their actual codes are in node module, right? So if we delete the node module, we can get it back because we already have the name of the packages as well as their version numbers with us, right? So anytime we can get rid of node module and get it back. So wherever we have to optimize space, like if we want to push this project into Git, we'll not be pushing the whole project, but we will only be pushing, we will delete this node module and pushing the rest part of the project, right? Because we can get it back. Okay. Now, let's go to the second part. Right. So we discussed about endpoints, which is, I wrote here two endpoints in index.js. One is /API/name/API. But let's say if we have hundreds of endpoints, will we be writing everything in this index.js? No, right? So we will be using a feature of Express, which is route. Okay. What we'll be doing is we will logically segregate our endpoints into multiple parts, and we'll be using the routes to take you to that endpoints, right? So let's go to routes over here. So let me create two routes for now, just for an example. Let's create one route for a user and one route, let's say, as we are building a URL shortener app, one route for URL. Okay. So I'll create two folders over here. Actually, I'll be creating only one folder, that is a route. And inside this, I'll be creating two files. One is user route and another one is URL route. So when we have a high level this diagram of this here, let me just quickly show it to you. Yeah, if you look at this diagram, here you see right now we are talking about API server. So we are separating our endpoints logically with the help of routes. Okay, these routes functionalities will keep in controller. So if you hit that path, your function is going to run, and this function can actually have some logic, or it can talk with mongoose and database to give you some data as well, right? So let's come over here and let me just copy this part over here. Okay, so from Express we are creating a route. Let me call this route as user route. Last time in the index.js, we were directly writing app.get. The same thing here we'll be writing. Okay, my bad. I should write in user. So I changed this router name to user route, and this you can use. And here onwards, you can define your endpoints. So there are different types of HTTP methods. We'll go through it in the next steps. But let me write two endpoints over here. One is URL router.get, and here if you click on /profile, it gives you adjacent data. Let's say if you hit on slash, then it gives you some other data, let's say name. Kaushik. So let's test this. Okay. How we will be testing this is a user router, right? So I am exporting this from here. Yesterday we discussed if we have to export something from a file, we can use export default dot user router, right? Okay, let me come over here and remove all the endpoints I have directly written over here, and I'll say app dot use, and here basically you need to give a prefix path like starting path. If this path is there in your API, then it will go inside this router and search for the match. Okay, so let's say I write here /user as I am writing up. user router. So I'll just import this. Now let's try to run this and see if it is working perfectly. So can you tell me, if I have to hit this endpoint, what will be the path? Our server is running at 3000. So 3000 slash user slash profile. Let's try it out. 3000 slash user slash profile. Okay, we get some error, node module not found.
Export should have been user router.
Okay.
Where is this import bit? Index.
Index.js. I think yeah. Okay. So you see that anything which has user will go into user router. Okay. Now, can you help me to write one more, let's say, one more router, which is URL router. Okay. So here I'm writing it. I'll just change the name of user router to URL router. And here you can write as many endpoints as you want, right? Now, how do we separate this URL router from the user router over here in index.js? So anything starting with user will go into user router. Anything starting with URL should go into URL router. But it is not necessarily that you'll have to write URL only. You can write something different, meaningful, right? So let me just import this as well over here. And now if I change this user to URL, still it's working, right? Okay. Now, if we go back to our block label diagram, here right now we are talking about routers, right? Next to it is controllers, right? Now look at over here. When this path is hit, we run a function. It's an arrow function, right? Is it necessary to write it here only? No, right? We can write it somewhere else, import that function over here, because we don't want to write everything over one place, right? So what I can do is I can just take this function from here. Let's create a controller directory. And here, let's write user controller.js. And I have just taken the part of the code which was written there. Can we create a function here with that? Yes. So let's say we want to write a arrow function. So const, let's say get user details is equal to this function, right? So how do you export this? Export default get user details. Yeah, I'll just take it from here, come to route as user. Okay, we took it from URL router, right? So I'll come over here and import this function. Is there any issue doing this? No, right? So let me run this once again. And here if we come, okay, there is some error again. Okay, when we import this, we have to write the full path. Still works. Yeah. Now these controllers, if we see over here, can have its logic when you are making an call to endpoint, you are hitting the endpoint, it can have its own logic, or if it needs data, it can take the data from database, right? Not always we need a data. So whenever we need a data, we'll connect with the help of Mongoose to our MongoDB, get the data. But if we don't need the data, we'll write our logic and just return the data from there, right? So you understand this, how router and controllers is segregated over here, right? Okay. So next part we'll be learning is about Mongo, MongoDB. So let's go back over here. Okay. So before going to MongoDB, let's look at few important things about REST API. Okay. So there are HTTP methods, right? Mainly there are 5 HTTP methods. What are those? Get, post, put, delete, patch, right? Get is used to get the data. Post it used to create a record, right? Okay. Put is used to update the record, but patch is also used to update the record. But what's the difference between put and patch? So put is used to update the whole record. It's like replacing the record. And patch is like updating few fields of that record. So if you just want to update a small portion of the data of the record, then you will be using patch. If you have to replace the whole data, you will be using put, right? Delete, everyone knows it will be used to delete the data. Okay. So these are the methods we were discussing: get, post, put, patch, delete. This is there in the Metapic article. You can read it as well later on. So there are some status code. We should remember these status code because we'll be using this frequently. And if you use any application, you also see this status code, right? So 200 is for okay. This 301 and 302 are specific to our project, or where 301 is permanently moved, 302 is temporarily redirected. Means when you give a short URL, it redirects to a original URL or a long URL, right? If it is temporarily moved, then you have to give status code as 302. If permanently moved, means 301. 400, it is for bad request. 500 is for server errors. There are more status code with 400. There are more status code for with 500. We must remember it. I have mentioned here few of them which we'll be using, and these are commons, like 401 for unauthorized, 403 for forbidden, 404 for not found, and 500 for server error, right? So methods and status code, these are clear, right? Okay. Now, how user can send the data? This is an important part. User can send the data with the API call in different ways. We must understand this and can get it, like we'll see the syntax or the code, how to get that data. So there are mainly 5 ways. User can send the data in the query. User can send the data in the params. User can send the data in the API body, or as an header or as an cookie. How we retrieve this data is an important part. Okay. So this endpoint which we created, let's say that if user wants to send the data over here, user can send it with a query. So how query is constructed is, in this URL, you will be placing question mark, and here you can give a key and a value. So you can write something like page is equal to 10, and I hit enter. Still I get the same data, but how do I retrieve this data in the backend? Okay, so let's go over here, URL/profile. So we'll start with index.js. Here we have URL. We'll go to this routed URL/profile. So this is the function which is running. Am I right? Here we have request and we have response. So where do we find the data? In the request or in response? Request, because user is making a request, right? So let's just print this request. And go back in our console. Run this once again. Do you see this data here? Page 10, right? Now here we can send more key value pairs. Like you can separate it with and here I can write limit is equal to 1. You would have also seen this in the paginated page, right? When we use pagination, you see this changing in the URL. So that information is being sent in the query. And you see here, we get it in a JSON object, right? So this is one way. But sometime, like let me show you over here in MentorPick. If you go to someone's profile page, like let's say I go to my profile page. So what is the path here? Profile/username, right? Let's say if you are opening your own profile, what will be the path? Your own username, right? So this is not a query, but this path is not fixed, it's changing. Am I right? So how do you get this username which is changing? You will get this as a parents. Okay, so we have seen how to get the data from query. Let's see how we can get the data from parents. So let me go back over here quickly. What I'll be doing over here is in this I'm creating one more route. Here I am keeping this as variable and saying here, let's say username. Okay, but the issue is, how will it differentiate between these two? If you say /profile, should it go over here or should it come over here? First one will match and it will never go to the second one. So there should be some differentiation, right? So maybe I can write it as profile uh, something like this. Now there is differentiation. Like if there is slash something, it will go to /profile, it will go to the first one. If there is /profile and something, then it will go to the next one. So similar to this function, we'll be writing one more function, get my details. And here instead of query, I'll be writing params. Okay. Instead of sending being 0, let's send this value itself. Params dot whatever is the name you wrote over here. So you wrote username. So with the same variable, you will be able to retrieve that. So let's save it, take this function, paste it over here, import. Acha, I have to export.
Get my
Hmm?
get user details.
Yeah, it is but I have to export both of them. No?
Yeah.
So
Packets we can.
yeah. Okay. No, there is another syntax we'll be using for exporting.